The long-term battle of nostalgia versus present day is definitely represented the best by Generation 1 of Pokemon. The reality is Generation 1 is the most talked about region in the entire franchise by a country mile. Whether you're a self-proclaimed Gen 1er, whether you love it, whether you hate it, it's definitely the most marketable region in the entire franchise. Because it's the most marketable region, it's the easiest one to go back to. That's why all the TCG cards seem to go back to Generation 1 at some point. I mean, I'm still collecting 151, not very well, might I add, because I'm not able to get any of the packs. I've got some nice cards, but it's too much money. It's way too much money. Away from my struggles of trying to collect 151, however, there is a reason why in terms of the games we've had 3 total iterations of Kanto. Spanning over 22 years, which has shown the evolution of gaming as time has gone on, we've ended up seeing the franchise evolve exponentially over that time. Today it's time to look over these 3 iterations and see which is the best version of Kanto to play. Not to make a wrestling reference, because everyone knows I'm a big fan, but it's time to have a triple threat match. Pokemon Red and Blue versus Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green versus Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu. What is the best iteration of Kanto? And before we start, it's important that we separate the feelings of nostalgia you have towards some of these games and the actual quality of life. Let's be straight, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee are the most up-to-date games that are available to us of Kanto, and therefore in terms of the graphics it's 100% the best option to play. They came out in late 2018 as we needed a game on the Nintendo Switch, and it was 14 years after the previous iteration of Fire Red and Leaf Green, which was 8 years after the original games on Game Boy. If graphical output was the only thing we were considering in this entire video, then Let's Go would have this down 100%. The reality is those 22 years difference from the original games to Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu, the technology had developed exponentially. I would actually argue that graphically the Let's Go games are some of the best Pokemon games we've ever got, and that's even considering the fact we got 2 generations after them. And in fact, even those 8 years made a massive difference for Fire Red and Leaf Green as they managed to get the Generation 3 engine when they were made. This allowed for a massive improvement from the original capabilities of the Game Boy, and unfortunately when it comes to the standard quality of life based on graphics, the original games lose out dramatically. Now of course that's not the fault of Pokemon Red and Blue, they came out at a time where the technology was not as advanced as we've got now, and it's also important to note the amount of people that were working on Red and Blue when the original came out was significantly lower than those that worked on Fire Red and Leaf Green, and therefore also on Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu. It's not the fault of Red and Blue to knock it down for the general quality of life, but the reality is when it came out in 1996 and we're now in 2025, it's obviously going to suffer significantly based on the capabilities of back then compared to now. The franchise developed significantly graphically, but most importantly mechanically as well. By Generation 3 we'd managed to fix some of the significant bugs that had existed in the franchise from Generation 1 all the way up until Generation 2 and 3. There was a lot of glitches in the original Red and Blue, some that were quite fun but some that were very frustrating, like the 1 in 256 glitch, which essentially meant if a move was 100% accurate, it would still miss 1 every 256 times. There was also a lot of other weird bugs that were in Generation 1 as well, including the fact that Ghost types were supposed to be super effective against Psychic types, but in actuality it did no effect against them, which essentially meant that Psychic types were really overpowered in the game. It also changed how we worked out critical hits. Originally it was done on speed, so Pokemon like Alakazam that also had the benefit of being a Psychic type and fast completely destroyed the entire field, as well as splitting that special stat into special attack and special defense, which definitely made some Pokemon weaker and some Pokemon stronger. Now so far in this video it might feel like we're bashing the original games a little bit because everything in Fire Red and Leaf Green was basically an improvement on the original games, and when comparing the gameplay from Fire Red and Leaf Green to the Let's Go games, that's why this conversation gets a little bit trickier. You see, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee came out around the time when Pokemon Go was at its peak. Now of course Pokemon Go still does very well, but nothing can compare to the hysteria when that app came out. You know, we had people setting themselves in a different country to try and download the app, or people running in parks to try and get Charizard. Now it may seem like a weird marketing choice now, but when it originally came out there was nothing like Pokemon Go. And again, back to that Generation 1 thing, when Pokemon Go came out it only had the original 151 Pokemon. And Nintendo had a new console that was about to come out that needed a main series Pokemon game to be released on it. Not just that, they did have motion controls on the Switch and Generation 8 wasn't going to be ready just yet. So they made the decision to once again remake Kanto in the form of a Let's Go game. They scaled back some of the key features that had been introduced in the games previously, including abilities that came in Generation 3. They also took out hold items as well as the ability to battle Pokemon in the wild. Instead, you would have to just try and capture them in a similar way you do in Pokemon Go. This essentially means that Pokemon Let's Go is a heavily simplified version of the main series titles, because it would allow you to get stronger Pokemon quickly using candies, which would honestly let you annihilate through most of the game with no issue. Of course, it's important to mention some of the other key gameplay factors, including the fact that some of them have a post-game. The Let's Go games focus on beating Master Trainers, while Fire Red and Leaf Green are all about the exploration of the Sevi Islands. Red and Blue don't have any post-game, but you've got to remember they came out at a time where we didn't expect any post-game content, because at the end of the day it was the first one and therefore a blank canvas. So the fact that it doesn't actually have any post-game content I don't feel should go against it. I will say something that works in the favour of Generation 1, and it definitely wouldn't for any other generation in the franchise, is the fact that these games are incredibly broken. Due to the fact that the game code is heavily fragile, it's very easy to break just by playing through the game. And for those who like to do speedruns, you can also do arbitrary code to basically make the game do whatever you want. Honestly, you could go through Generation 1 and just accidentally break it on your own without doing any sort of research. That's how broken these games are sometimes. Now, some of the glitches are definitely a negative. I mean, the 1 in 256 glitch, for example, is a big problem. But it's probably the only main series title in the entire franchise that almost gets a little bit of a pass for how broken it is sometimes. Or maybe it's the fact that everyone can break it and therefore can have a bit of fun with it, or maybe because of the nostalgia aspect. But honestly, it can make for a crazy experience if you've never had the chance to break Generation 1. Now, because we've got 3 different iterations of this and it spans across 20 years, something we do have to mention is the accessibility to these games. I have been a long critic on this channel of discussing how expensive old Pokemon games are nowadays, and it's definitely not just related to Pokemon, but maybe the entire gaming world itself. I feel like I shout about this on every single video, and I've actually done a full video on why Pokemon games are so expensive nowadays, but honestly, trying to buy old games is just bank breaking now. If we were just to do a simple search for the old Kanto games, the one that would be the least accessible is Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, followed by the original games, and then Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu would be the easiest to access because they're the most recent. Of course, I'm not considering you buying the console there. If you tried to buy an old Game Boy, it'd be very, very expensive. I mean, I recently looked at when I bought SmackDown vs. Raw back in like 2014 or 15, and I'm sure I paid like £2, and now it's like £30 everywhere. The entire market is just heavily flawed. Now, you're probably saying, well, there's another option that we can take in order to play these games, but I would like my channel to stay here in the future, so therefore I am not going to condone it because I would like to stay here. Please, Nintendo, I don't want you to come for me like everybody else. I would like to have a channel in the future because I really enjoy doing this, so I can't advocate for that. I never would in the future or the past. I never have, no. And that method that can't be mentioned also shows another issue, which is the ability to transfer Pokemon from game to game. If we're talking about the accessibility, then it's important to discuss the original tagline for the main series anime, which was the gotta catch 'em all, and definitely influenced how a lot of us see Pokemon. Now, this gets really, really tricky across the franchise and is quite frustrating, but let's start at the basic. And that's the fact that Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu are the easiest to transfer Pokemon over because they're on the Switch and so is Pokemon Home. So it's very easy to just transfer your Pokemon from game to game with no issue. After the Let's Go games, it gets extremely complicated when discussing the main series titles for Generation 1. And this is simply down to the shutdown of the 3DS. So if you wanted to transfer your Pokemon over from the Generation 3 versions Fire Red and Leaf Green, you would have to put them onto Generation 4 via the PAL Park. And then you have to transfer it from Generation 4 to Generation 5, and then Generation 5 to Pokemon Bank, and then Pokemon Bank to Pokemon Home. There's quite a lot of steps in there. For Generation 1, because it was accessible on the 3DS, which I've conveniently not mentioned until this time, you could then transfer it over to Pokemon Bank and then to the Pokemon Home app. But because this link has now been severed completely, you're not able to do that. Well, you can in one sense if you still got access to Pokemon Bank or originally downloaded it, and you can do so, but if you've never bought Pokemon Bank and you're starting from scratch, then I'm very sorry, but your Pokemon have been banished to the Shadow Realm and you're not transferring your favourite Charizard from Generation 1 all the way up to Pokemon Home. This is one of the major concerns that a lot of people had in April 2024 when it shut down. If you're a new fan of the franchise, you're not going to be able to transfer any Pokemon from old games, unfortunately. Again, that plays into the accessibility issue because you're not able to transfer over Pokemon. That'll definitely turn a lot of people off, making Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee the only option you have if you want to transfer over Pokemon. Unless, of course, you've had Pokemon Bank in the past and you can re-download it, or you've currently got it downloaded, then you might be fine. But even so, it's still a lot of steps to get that Pokemon all the way over. And most most importantly, incredibly frustrating. I'm still waiting for the virtual console to have old games, by the way. I mean, we've got some, and we're going to get XD Gale of Darkness for the Pokemon GameCube, which I'm quite excited about. But the reality is we're losing access to the old games nowadays, and it's getting worse and worse. So we discussed some of the changes, the gameplay, as well as the accessibility of these games, but what's the definitive version of Kanto? Well, Pokemon Red and Blue are the original experience of the franchise, with it being the entire base of where we are now. But beyond that, unfortunately, they're quite limited in what they offer. And that's not me saying they're bad because they're limited, but the reality is that the franchise has moved on, and Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green are basically the same games but better. Like I say, by Generation 3, a lot of the game breaking issues have been solved. They added a lot of gameplay changes that made the franchise a lot more fun, as well as adding post-game content. Let's Go, on the other hand, is a bit more of a gimmicky version. Graphically, it's the better of the three options by a mile, but that's because of the technology that exists. But on the other hand, it tones down a lot of the key features that make Pokemon fun, including the abilities and held items. Oh, and it also includes Jesse and James from an anime and takes more of an inspiration from Pokemon Yellow, which was the third version of Generation 1, which I've conveniently not mentioned because of this exact reason. I feel like Pokemon Yellow is automatically written out for the pure fact that Let's Go, Eevee and Pikachu exist. When we're discussing the most authentic definitive edition of Pokemon, then Fire Red and Leaf Green is definitely the version to go for Kanto. It's basically the original games but better in every way. Graphically, the best games are definitely Let's Go and Eevee, feeling a bit more of a convenient way to collect Pokemon nowadays because of their access to Pokemon Home, with the original two not really having access anymore unless you already have Pokemon Bank. But instead of just saying that you should play Fire Red and Leaf Green because it's the most authentic experience, I'm going to give you 3 separate categories and see which one you fit into. If nostalgia is the main reason you're into Pokemon, you should play Pokemon Red and Blue. At the end of the day, Red and Blue are a big part of gaming history. They have essentially set the entire course of the franchise that we're on today, and because of that, it's a worthwhile experience to see what the original games were and how they became so successful. Even the quirks and glitches within these games are a sight to behold. When you consider the current gaming market and how flawed a lot of games are on release nowadays, you can see that the original games could certainly fit into that category. I mean, you can break the game in literal minutes. It's also really fun to play as a speedrun as well. You should definitely check them out. Or maybe I should do a speedrun of Pokemon Red and Blue, but I imagine I'd be terrible. I did a Pokemon Puzzle League one once and that was dreadful. I would have recommended playing this on the virtual console on the 3DS, but unfortunately it just doesn't exist anymore. Now, if you want the authentic Pokemon experience, then Fire Red and Leaf Green is definitely the option to go for. It is essentially the original games but better, including post-game content as well as things like abilities. Of course, important to mention, any improvements past Generation 3 do not exist in this one, but still you can see how the franchise evolved from Generation 1 to Generation 3 through Fire Red and Leaf Green. Unfortunately, there's no physical and special split for moves, so your Hitmonchan is still basically worthless with its elemental punches, but still, that doesn't take away from the experience as a whole. Now, if you're into the more casual side of the franchise, then you should definitely play Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. In terms of convenience, it's the best one because it's easily accessible, it's easier to transfer over Pokemon, and the gameplay is much more simplified from the main series titles. Though they still have the battling features, of course, it's just nowhere near as intricate as the main series. So if nostalgia drives you, play Pokemon Red and Blue. If you want to play the definitive edition, then play Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. And if you want a more casual option, make sure to play Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Or we can just abandon all the games and play Pokemon Yellow and struggle with a Thundershot Pikachu against Brock. That is entirely your choice. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe as it really helps out the channel. Make sure to comment down below your experience with Kanto. As always, make sure to stay tuned for more Pokemon content. And other than that, I'll see you guys next time.